Somebody asked how we can keep our young children away from devices like smartphones and tablets and things like that. And they brought up that even, when they get into school, then sometimes the school is giving them devices themselves for their time during class. But there's a really important sort of mistake in reasoning that we make. Sometimes we imagine that just because our children are exposed to something in a little bit, that means then that we shouldn't do anything about it and we should just, open the floodgates and let them be exposed to it all the way. And that's not true, because there's a big difference between somebody using a device for an hour or two in a classroom versus somebody using it in their bedroom, somebody having 24-hour access to it, right? Personal account, a personal device, these sorts of things. So I would push back on the idea that some people say, well, they're going to get exposed to it anyway, or they're going to get exposed to it they're already using it in the school. So what? Being able to use a device in the school doesn't mean you should be able to have it in the home. Doesn't mean that you should be able to have your own proprietary one. Doesn't mean that you're going to let your kid use it in their own room, right? And I think those are all sorts of different levels where we need to push back. Okay, so one of the things, and this goes back to the very beginning when I was growing up, and home computers became a thing, right? We used to be where you had one home computer that was in like the living room or some sort of office or study sort of room. And then if you were doing anything, it was in public. It was around everybody else. Anybody at any time can bust in on you and see what you're doing, right? Very, very different social dynamic than having one to yourself, able to take it into your bedroom. And a lot of parents are savvy to that and have realized that, no screens in the bedroom, no screens behind closed doors, these sorts of things. So that's a really super important thing. Make the use of those devices as public and as communal as possible, as opposed to individual and private. Also, they shouldn't really have their own, right? You can have a tablet for your whole family. You don't need to give every kid one, especially smartphones, especially, when they're young. So these are things that you just have to set the expectation, and you need to be, firm. And maybe more importantly, you need to be willing to be unpopular. And that has to do with being unpopular maybe with your kid. If your kid is under bad influences and has other people who are like, well, so-and-so does it. Well, I don't care about so-and-so. You're not so-and-so. I want you to be better than so-and-so, right? Or when it comes to what society is doing in general, we have to be, if we're going to be Muslims and hold this thing down, then we have to be comfortable with being different, right? And so-and-so doing it is not an excuse, and it's not a justification. And the last thing I would say, and that kind of brings us to this, is that we need to be very, very intentional about the influences on our children and the friends that they're making. Okay, if they're in a public school, then obviously that's not 100% in your control. But you should be actively trying to build friendships between your child and other children and other families that you have shared values with. That comes to families in your masjid, in your local community, might be other family members, might be other neighbors, right? If you're just going to let your kid just make friends at school, then it's probably going to turn out more difficult than if you're actually involved, intentional about the friend matching process, and you're giving your child a multitude of different sort of influences that are hopefully, mostly, on the whole, good and positive.